Likutei Sichos, Chelik Chafei, volume 25, the second Sicha for Parshas Vayera. This Sicha will explain, he'll delve into, the medrash which makes the connection between what Avrohom said in this week's Parsha, namely, Va'anoichi Afer Va'efer, and the reward that's spelled out in the medrash, that the Bnei Yisrael, his descendants, receive the mitzvah of Efer Parah, the ashes of the Parah Aduma, and Afar Saita, the earth, the dust of the Saita. So as a quick introduction, so we're better familiar with some of the concepts and ideas that I mentioned in the Sicha, to help us flow through it more easily. So we know about the emotional attributes, Chesed and Gevura, which are essentially the main attributes. What is Chesed? Of course, Chesed means kindness, givingness. And Gevura is typically translated as severity or strength. Chesed is metaphorically compared to mayim, water, because the characteristic of water is that it comes mimokim gavoya lemokim nomach. It comes down, it's giving, in a giving downward motion. Whereas Gevura is typically associated with fire, which is strong, severe. Also, to think of an example of Gevura, think about mishpat, justice, judgment. That is a certain experience of Gevura, where sometimes you have to block your own chesed, your own desire to do kindness to the person, and look at the facts and judge accordingly. Now, another thing about Gevura that it's worthwhile to know is that it says there are 5 levels of Gevuras. Hey Gevuras. 5 levels of Gevuras, and there is a idea called Hamtokas HaGevuras, literally translated the sweetening of the severity. Okay, to give you an example of it, so it's not just an abstract idea, think about salt. You would associate salt typically with being Gevura, because salt is bitter, it is harsh. However, think about food without any salt being spread out in that food, sprinkled in the food. The food is bland, the food has no taste, it's unsweetened. Thus, when you do hamtokas hagvuros, that means you accordingly and appropriately break down the gevuros, you actually end up with sweetness. But make no mistake, when it comes to chesed and gevura, chesed versus gevura, gevura versus chesed, it's not that one is greater or better than the other. Rather, each one has its effect, each one has its function, as we'll see in the Sicha. Now, what is the Efer Parah Aduma? What is it, the ashes of Parah Aduma? So if somebody became Tameh by means of coming in contact with a dead body, they would have to have the ashes of the Parah Aduma, the red heifer, had to be perfectly red. The ashes of the cow was mixed into mayim chayim, to waters, to spring water, and that spring water is sprinkled on the person in a certain regimen, and that would make the person tahor again. What is the afar saita, the earth of the saita? So we know that unfortunately a married woman that's suspected of having had an extramarital affair, which would make her forbidden to continue in this relationship, and she denies it, and this is after she was warned, perhaps maybe even repeatedly by her husband, then Hashem says, you bring her to the Beis HaMikdash, and there you write a small scroll with the designated verses as prescribed in the Torah, and which include Hashem's holy name, which typically, of course, it's absolutely forbidden to erase the name. And here, after the ink dries, we scrape it off into a cup of water, and then you take some of the afar from the floor of the Mishkan, or later the Beis HaMikdash, you take some of the dirt that's there and mix it in, and it becomes like a bitter potion, and that she has to drink. And that checks her. If, God forbid, she had committed this sin, then it would kill her. And if not, then it would actually make her even healthier and more fertile. In fact, the Torah says if she did have children till then, now she'll have. If she gave birth in a difficult manner, now it would become easier. Another thing to be familiar with, a concept which we're well familiar with, I think already, bitul, which means, it doesn't mean low self-esteem, but rather it means the void of one's own arrogance and feeling of self-importance. Rather, one knows their place and one understands that there are things that are higher than them. And finally, the mitzvah of Pidyon Shvuyim. Pidyon Shvuyim is the ultimate mitzvah of tzedakah, of kindness, of chesed, because you're going out there to redeem the captives, as one of the things Avrohom Avinu did, as we'll see in the Sicha. So, let's go into the Sicha. So we have the story of Sodom, where Hashem notifies Avrohom Avinu that he's going to destroy the city of Sodom, and Avram stands there pleading with Hashem again and again and again, begging for Hashem to perhaps overturn this terrible decree. And one of the things Avrohom Avinu says, as he's begging Hashem, as he's, so to speak, pestering Hashem, he says, I am nothing, v'anoichi afar v'efer. I am nothing, I am but afar, which means dirt, earth, and efer, which is ashes. Says the Medrash, that in the merit of this expression that Avrohom Avinu said, in the merit of humility, we, his descendants, were zoicha, we merited to two great mitzvahs, which also include afar and efer. Efer is the ashes of the parah aduma, and afar is the dirt that is mixed in to the portion of the tzayta. Now it's known that when Hashem gives reward, and likewise punishment, it's always midah keneged midah, a measure for a measure. That means there is a direct connection, there's a direct correlation. It's not just random, and therefore here is so too, it cannot just be random because here it's ashes, and his expression was Aether, and there is earth, and his expression was earth. No, that's too superficial, that's too random. Rather, there has to be a deeper connection in the actual idea of what he meant and what the Efer Hapara is all about, what the offer of the Saita water is all about. There's something deeper here. So it would seem that in Parah Aduma, actually on the surface, if you think about it, the whole idea of the Parah Aduma, perhaps it would seem that it is the opposite of correlating, connecting to Avrohom Avinu himself. Why? Think about it. Avrohom Avinu is the epitome of chesed, the epitome of kindness. In fact, as the Medrash tells us, the attribute of kindness came before Hashem to complain and said, from when Avrohom Avinu was around, I have nothing to do. My job's done. He's doing it for me. Now, that is Avram. But think about the Parah Aduma. What is the Parah Aduma? So let's take, first of all, in the Zohar. The Zohar says that the Parah Aduma it emanates from the left side. Now we know in terms of the attributes, Chesed and Gevura, Chesed is on the right, in the formation of the attributes, and Gevura is on the left. So left is Gevura. Then the Arizal takes it further, and he says if you look at the word Para, it's par means a cow, with an added hay. What does that hay represent? That is the 5 levels of Gevura, as we mentioned in the introduction. Then, if you take it even further, and you look at the actual prerequisite of the Parah Aduma, in its name, Aduma, red. What is red? Red is an expression of Gevura. The color of Gevura is red. Furthermore, take it even further. In the Medrash it says that the 4 criteria, means requirement, for what makes, if you look in the verse, for what makes the cow fit to be a Parah Aduma, corresponds to the 4 exiles, which obviously they're all an expression of Gevura. So if so, if it was talking about the waters of the Parah Aduma, meaning the water that's actually used after they mix together the ashes with the water, and that is sprinkled on the person, then it would make sense. I can see the connection between the Parah Aduma, or its waters, and Avrohom Avinu, because water, as we said in the introduction, is associated with Chesed. But here the emphasis is on the ashes. Says the Rebbe, here's the explanation. We know that there are 2 manners, there are 2 aspects to chesed, kindness. In other words, it stems from 2 different modes of mentality. You have a chesed that comes because a person is so great, like a king, or somebody who's an extremely filthy rich person. Because of their position of greatness or power, this gives them like a trigger, a desire to do kindness with all. But where is it coming from? It's coming from their level of greatness, their level of power or affluency, whatever it may be. Now, this is not the ultimate chesed. Why? Because it could lead to one doing it to show off, to feel power, to show how kind they are. And this basically is what we call chesed de Yishmael. Yes, Yishmael does chesed, but it comes from a place of the person's need to make himself feel good, make himself feel grandiose. Then you have the other type of chesed, and that is the chesed of Avrohom Avinu. That this comes from the exact opposite, from bitul, from a person feeling, like Avrohom Avinu said, V'anoichi ofar ve'efer, I am but nothing. The person feels so small, so insignificant, that everybody else is more important to him, is more important than himself. And therefore he gives to others, he helps others. Furthermore, because it stems from bittul, then he helps others and he gives to others above and beyond, even on the account of his own personal pain or own personal loss. That by him giving to another, he's going to have less, or he's going to even have a certain level of pain. Still, he gives it to somebody else. Why? Because since it comes from bittul, his chesed comes from bittul, so it's not about himself, it's not about him. And we actually see this in the very first account of Avroham's kindness in the Torah, the explicit account of Avroham's kindness. We see that Avrohom actually endangered his own life to do kindness for others. And that's in last week's parsha, where Avrohom Avinu went to pursue the kings to release the hostages, to release their properties. Now think about it. Going after the kings is inherently a danger to his own life. And yet he had that level of kindness because it wasn't about him, it was about what he could do for someone else. That's as far as material aspect of things are concerned. Now even spiritually we find in this week's parsha, very explicitly, that Avrohom Avinu is ready to sacrifice his own spiritual gain in order to do kindness for others. When he saw the three angels, he's there with Hashem. He had the ultimate revelation that a human being can possibly have. And yet, what does he say? He says to Hashem, please don't pass, al nosavar ma'alavdecha, and he goes and he runs to accommodate his guests, or so he thought they were guests. So basically, and who were these people? These were not people on his level. This was not, so to speak, his peers. These were Arabs that he had to actually take precautions later because he was concerned that they're on such a low level, which is the antithesis of Avrohom Avinu himself, that they worship the dust that's under their feet. And yet, what did he do? What did he do? He ran towards them, going away, leaving this tremendous opportunity of being in the presence of Hashem and that revelation. With such conviction, with such determination for helping another, for kindness, doing kindness to another, doing benevolence. Where does this come from? It comes from V'anoichi ofar ve'efer, as Avrohom Avinu said. That by him, it's so absolutely obvious to him that it doesn't matter who is before him, but anyone else comes before him. In other words, it doesn't matter who's standing in front of him, if it's a person of his peers or not, he has to do chesed, he has to give to others. Now we can appreciate the connection between the ashes of the paraduma and the earth of the Saita to what Avrohom Avinu said, V'anoichi ofar ve'efer, because we said his chesed stems from that. You see, look at the Efer of the paraduma, the ashes of the paraduma. What happens? The person who actually does the process of turning it into ash, and also the person who handles the ashes, that person, that kohen himself, becomes tamei for the day. In other words, while he's in the process of trying to help another, to give purity to another Jew, he himself becomes impure, which obviously restricts him from going into the Beis HaMikdash, from enjoying all that spiritual experience that he would have had he been able to go into the Beis HaMikdash. It also it doesn't allow him to partake in the eating of the Truma, which is a great endeavor. All this he does, he's losing from himself, from his own spiritual high level, in order to do for another, to bring purity to another Jew. And perhaps a Jew who's associated with death. And death, by definition, means that it is something that is torn away from Hashem. So it actually represents an idea, a Jew that's in a very low level, very far from his level, obviously, but yet he's ready to sacrifice his own spiritual well-being for another Jew. Where do you see also this idea of sacrificing for the benefit of another in the earth of the Saita? Remember, Hashem says, erase my name from that little scroll, together with all the letters, with the other words, into the cup of water, have her drink it, and maybe this will bring peace and harmony between husband and wife. Again, Hashem is, so to speak, sacrificing his own name, which ordinarily is forbidden to erase it, forbidden to do any harm to it, any damage to it, and here he's ready to sacrifice it for the sake of perhaps bringing benefit to another. And according to this also we'll have a insight into an interesting story, an episode, which is related in the Zohar. The Zohar says that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair once asked from the Rabbi, from Shimon ben Yochai, that he should tell him some chidush, some novel idea, a novelty in the mitzvah of paraduma. So Rabbi goes ahead and calls his son Rabbi Elazar, and he asked him that he should give him a thought. The Rebbe's father explains that the reason why Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair wanted to have a chidush, a teaching, specifically in the matter of paraduma, is because Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai was similar to Avrohom Avinu, who said on himself, "Anochi Ofar va'efer." And indeed, we find that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair was very well known for the fact that he would travel to far distances to perform the mitzvah of Pidyon Shvuyim, of redeeming the captive Jews. And in fact, as I mentioned earlier, this is the very first mitzvah, the very first act of kindness that's explicitly mentioned in the Torah associated with Avrohom Avinu. And that's why Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair wanted to know an insight into paraduma, because like we said, the question is, however, wait, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair feels like he wants to have an insight in the idea of paraduma, because the idea of sacrificing from yourself, like he would do, to go do for others, then how come he didn't say it himself? Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair was also a great Talmid Chacham. Why didn't he give a chidush in this matter? And instead he asked for Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, why Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai actually also did not answer the question, and rather he delegates it to his son. The answer is because inherent in the quality of Anochi Ofar va'efer, as we explained before, now we can appreciate it, is the idea of giving up your own benefit from yourself and allowing it for someone else, to help someone else. Look what happened over here. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair asks Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai to give the chidush. Why? Because it is a tremendous accomplishment. It is a great spiritual pleasure to make a chidush in the Torah. It's a schos, it's a merit. So Rabbi Pinchas could have taken it for himself, and instead he seized the opportunity to offer it to Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, even though that means that he would lose it. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai did exactly the same thing. Instead of him taking it for himself, he delegated it, he gave it over to his son to give him this opportunity. Now we can really appreciate why V'anochi Ofar va'efer that Avrohom Avinu said is associated specifically and exclusively with the ashes of the paraduma and not the waters of the paraduma. Because this idea is that he utilized the attribute of gvura, he channeled it, and he used it for the purposes of enhancing and implementing the ultimate chesed. This is what the pasuk means when the Hashem says, why is he going to share with Avrohom Avinu about what's going to happen in Sodom? What does Hashem say? What is the testimony of Avrohom Avinu and his legacy? Is the testament. He says, Ki yadaitiv lemana sheyitzave es banov vesbeisei acharov, that I know that he will teach all the future generations that have come from him, lasois tzedakah umishpat, to do tzedakah, which is benevolence, charity, and mishpat, and justice. And the question is, how does one connect to the other? How do they go together? Tzedakah is chesed, and mishpat is gevura. The answer is that Avrohom Avinu used the mishpat. And now we can appreciate it. He used the mishpat, just judgment on himself. He judged himself to say, I don't need to have all these goodies. I don't need to have all these luxuries. A person like me, I'm just a nobody. I can suffice with very little. Everything else that I have to give to others. So in fact, what Avrohom Avinu did is, He took the Gevura and he channeled it. He used Gevura to enhance the chesed, to do the ultimate chesed. This approach, this type of conduct, that the Gevura assists the chesed and enhances the chesed, this comes from the disposition of bittul. You see, when a chesed, the true kindness of a person, comes from the bittul of the person, then it encompasses the entire person, all aspects of him, even that which seems to be the opposite of that actual attribute. It means the Gevura can actually assist and contribute to the chesed because of the bittul. And therefore, the schar, the reward, is from the Efer HaPara, is from the ashes of the para. Because the ultimate expression of Anoichi V'Efer V'Efer is when you take, like we said, an attribute that on the face of it doesn't seem to be chesed, right? You take Gevura, it doesn't seem to be chesed. You harness it and you convert it, you channeled it for chesed. And this happens when you take the para. You burn the para. How does the para become now usable to make someone tahar? You burn the para. What do? You take it from para. Remember we said before, par hay. Hay is the 5 levels of gvura, which is very severe, and can actually, if it's not, so to speak, harnessed, then it can actually turn into something very, very negative. And you turn it into a fer. You turn it into aleph par. And the aleph represents the ultimate level of Gevura, which is actually the most purest, and it's even greater, Kabbalistically speaking, than Chesed itself. And from now we can appreciate why Efer HaPara, that what the connection is, because Avrohom Avinu used, I'm just summarizing, Avrohom Avinu used the aspect of Gevura to enhance his Chesed, and likewise in the Para, by burning it, by breaking it down, which is a form of Gevura, you're now transferring it from being par hay, which represents the 5 levels of Gevura, and you're channeling it now, you're turning it around, transforming it to be aleph par, which is the ultimate greatest level. And likewise with the earth of the Saita, that instead of the water being the mayim hamorim, the bitter waters, or the waters that bring curse, this, says the Torah, becomes a water of the ultimate chesed, that it takes a woman that maybe was barren or had difficulties giving birth, and now she will be able to give birth.